Now, Brian, there's one final coach that I do want to bring up, and we could call it the black sheep of the family.
We can't talk about him on the offensive one because he doesn't coach a position. We can't talk about him on the defensive one because he doesn't coach a position.
Right.
So, and we're not doing a whole show just about him.
Right. So we're going to, because there's less coaches than in the offensive one, we put them on the defensive one.
And more defensive players tend to play special teams.
That's a good point. Okay, there you go. So there's a logical addition there. So we're going to talk about Brian Polian, and he also has a stripped off title. He's no longer the recruiting coordinator, obviously. He is the associate head coach. And he is also the special teams coordinator. Mm-hmm. And we both believe, and we talked about this when they made the changes, that this is probably a good change for Brian Polian. We know his aspirations are to be a head coach, and that is not a secret. I forgot when I was introducing this segment, I wanted to refer to him as Brian Kelly's best hype man.
Oh, goodness gracious.
But I forgot, so I had to get that in there. But the show that he put on during National Signing Day, man,
that was some impressive spin, man.
He cemented himself
flawlessly.
He did too. And listen, that's a compliment. Okay, I want people to understand. Yeah. I'm complimenting him.
Yeah,
because it is not easy to go up and say some of those things.
I would be complimenting him if I was Brian Kelly, but as Brian Driscoll, I'm not complimenting.
He did by giving him a raise.
He did what he was supposed to do.
That is absolutely correct.
For his boss.
Right. So that was a plus spin, my friend. So he was rewarded. He is now the associate head coach. He is still the recruiting coordinator, and I'm sure that there's a couple extra zeros in his bank account
he's
now.
Still the special teams coordinator. He's not
what I said. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I misspoke. Yes. Okay. He's the special teams coordinator.
I do that all the time.
Man, unbelievable. But so let's talk about why this is a big year for Brian Polian. Big year for Brian Polian. Go.
Well, number one, I don't think Brian Polian's done as good of a job recruiting as people say that he has. I mean, he's gotten a Hawaii, he's got a couple Hawaii kids and he's had a role there, but he to me hasn't had the impact that he had this first go round. And the big reason for that is because he doesn't have Charlie Weiss, the first go round. And so I think he needs to do a little bit better job recruiting. I think he needs to adapt more of the group philosophy, but also he needs to do a better job on the West Coast. Right now, Notre Dame is not doing a good enough job with the top prospects on the West Coast. They're getting good players, right? And they're getting good players and things like that, but they're not getting the top level players like they got before with like Manti Te'o and Sierra Wood and guys like that. And so to me, he needs to do a better job there, but more so special teams wise. First of all, I think it's poor staff management to have a special teams coordinator that only coaches special teams. I just think that is a misuse of that extra position.
Right, which they just added recently.
Right. I think it was after 2017, because remember that first year that he was hired, Tommy Rees was technically a graduate assistant.
Correct.
Even though he was the quarterback's coach, he was technically a graduate assistant.
Right.
Now, he was not treated in any way, shape, form, or fashion like a graduate assistant, but
Correct.
That's just kind of what they had to do because they knew the rule was going to go effect the next year.
Right.
It more so impacted Tommy Rees's bank account more than anything else.
Hey, man, if you don't think there was some under-the-table action going on.
But there's only so much under the table you can do for a graduate assistant. But
he still had family dinners. He was okay.
Yes, true. From a practicality standpoint, he was a full-time coach.
Right.
But now you have this special teams coach who only coaches special teams. And I think
do
that's
other programs do that? Let me ask you that.
Not many.
Okay.
Not many. Most teams have a special teams coordinator, but it will be a guy who also coaches a position, Gotcha. So now again, he may not be known as a great position coach, but it may be something where a guy coaches tight ends or he coaches the Rovers or something like that, where you have him
very
do
specific,
where he can help. Like even at worst, you hire so for example, let's just hypothetically, let's say Brian Polian got the head coaching job at Buffalo next year. Lance Leopold gets a Power 5 job. Brian Polian takes over Buffalo, right? And that'd be great for him. And Notre Dame decides to hire Nick Lazinski as a special teams coordinator and linebackers coach. Well, we know Marcus Freeman's going to help with the linebackers because that's kind of his thing. But it would be great to have an actual full-time coach be in charge of that so Marcus Freeman can, coordinate the defense. That to me would be much better use of that extra position, because right now you look at it, Notre Dame has the D-line coach, the corners coach, the safeties coach, and the defensive coordinator. That's 4 full-time coaches. Offensively, you have 5, and then you have the special teams coordinator.
Right.
I'd rather them hire a second O-line coach, and that's not a knock on Jeff Quinn, but you're seeing a lot more teams kind of have like a tackles, tight ends coach, and
right.
And some teams have like a slot receivers coach and an outside receiver.
Okay.
I mean, I think you can either do that or preferably a 5th coach on the defense, especially since the head coach is,
pretty much
an offensive guy.
It's really a 6-4 split.
Right.
Honestly.
And so when you consider Brian Kelly, and so
6-4-1.
to me, it seems like not the greatest use. Yeah. But here's the thing about it. If you're going to have a special teams coordinator only, he better have phenomenal special teams, right? And we were talked about this on Sports Beat a week or so ago when I was on with you guys, and the question was phrased as kind of like the Notre Dame special teams have been bad. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is because most people, when they think special teams, they think what?
They think return game.
They think return game, and
Absolutely.
They think the kicking operation. Well, Jonathan Dorr was very inconsistent this year. And Notre Dame, for whatever reasons, mostly probably analytics, doesn't kick a lot of field goals. If you go book, Justin Yoon was an incredibly accurate field goal kicker. He just never kicked many field goals. And so, I think when you look at that, and then you look at the return operation, they're mediocre, right? For the most part,
their coverage unit though,
phenomenal,
is really, really
outstanding.
Good. It is
and that's why I say it's unfair to say they're bad on special teams, because you can't be bad when you're as good as Notre Dame has been in coverage.
Right. And that's important.
It's very important. I mean,
right.
And it's a part of why the defense has been good. And my point that I made on the show was, look, when you have a good defense and you're forcing the other team to go 80+ yards every time they touch the ball, you're really good. And, I asked on the show, I said, well, when was the last time you remember Notre Dame giving up a long kick return? And it was, you had to go back to 2018 against Pitt, right? When they had that kick return for a touchdown. Notre Dame's opponents averaged 18 yards per kick return last year. That ranked 24th, but here's the thing. Some of the teams that ranked ahead of them played 4 games, 7 games, 5 games, 8 games, 6 games, 9 games, 6 games, 8 games, 6 games. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Lot smaller sample size.
Yeah.
Where those numbers are inflated.
Yeah. Notre Dame had almost the same number the year before, and they ranked 18th.
Yeah.
So they've been really good in coverage the last couple of years, and that's important because it aids the defense. It makes your defense better.
Sure, absolutely.
And we saw the same thing in punt returns. They were 20th this year in punt returns. They gave up an average of 3.7 yards per punt return. And again, the top 6 teams in the country played 8 games, 4 games, 5 games, 7 games, 3 games, 6 games. Right? Amongst the teams that played 10 or more games, Notre Dame was 12th. In punt returns allowed, So, those things to me are really important numbers. In the year before, Notre Dame was 15th in punt return yards allowed at 3.9 yards allowed. So Brian Polian gets a great deal of credit for that. And
that's great.
Right.
3.9 yards. Basically, if a guy catches the ball and falls forward, he's going to get 3 yards.
It means your net punting average is going to be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no doubt.
And I think Jay Bramlett's been an underrated kicker, and I think he's going to me, emerge as one of the better punters in the country in 2021. So to me, it's a thing where that part of the game is good, and that you have really talented linebackers, really talented safeties, and I think the depth chart at those 2 positions in corner this year, the numbers at those positions are really good, especially linebacker and corner. And you've got a couple of receivers like Xavier Watts, for example, that I think could be a really good special teams cover player that I'd like to see get a shot over there as well. So I expect the coverage units to be really good. And usually when the coverage units have made mistakes, it's more because the kicker didn't kick it where it's supposed to go than it was the coverage unit.
Hate it when that happens.
Yeah, but anyway, so that part of the deal is good, but the return game to me is a problem, and it has to get better. And when you have athletes like Notre Dame has, in my opinion, I'm sorry, when you have a guy like Chris Tyree back there returning kicks, when you have some Xavier Watts, Lorenzo Styles, Lawrence Key, some of the athletes that Notre Dame is going to have this year to potentially return kicks and punts. There's no excuse for me not to be better returning.
Yes.
And where Notre Dame has been poor, not just like not good, but I would argue poor.
Yeah.
The last couple of years has been in the return game.
Yes.
And that to me has got to get better. And the problem is,
I think it's a philosophy too, though.
Right.
Like they don't even want to be better, is what it feels
seem
like.
it, no.
You know what I mean?
No,
like
it doesn't seem like it.
in the semifinal when Tyree fumbled that ball, there was no way he was being allowed to return the ball the rest of the game.
Right.
And you're telling me that if he pops one off, that doesn't change the tide of that game early on.
Yeah.
I mean, you at least have to give yourself the opportunity. And the fact that they're not even putting somebody who has any ability to run to catch punts just tells me they don't have any desire to return punts. They want the ball. That is where they put their emphasis. They want the ball. And I guess if I had more faith in the offensive philosophy, then okay, give that offense the ball. At the moment, I don't. And so you need that third aspect, that punt return. You need that to help you get some yards to help your offense, because I'm not convinced the offense is going to score every time they got the ball. So just possessing the ball isn't enough for me. Okay. So they need to change their whole philosophy when it comes to the return game. Putting Chris Tyree back on kick returns was a baby step in the right direction. But if you're not going to allow him to return any kicks, it doesn't matter that he's back there.
Well, and not the philosophy. That's true. I agree with everything you just said, Vince. But to me, also, it goes a little bit deeper than that, to where you have to have it doesn't go deeper than that to build on what you said, because what you said was right. What I'm saying is the philosophy then will show itself by you being more creative with those things. But it fits the Brian Kelly philosophy, meaning when you think about the Notre Dame offense, what's the one thing that we kind of criticize them for? They don't take risks. There's no risk taking. I'm working on an article now where I hope to have it out over the next week, where it's like, yes, you don't want turnovers, and you don't want to make turnovers seem like not a big deal. But I remember people criticizing Deshaun Watson in 2016 because he turned the ball over some. He had like 17 interceptions that year. Oh, you can't win when you turn the ball over that much. Well, they won a flipping national championship that year, because if you eliminate the risk, then you also eliminate the reward that comes from him playing the game the way he played the game, because he threw 51 freaking touchdowns that year, And so to me, Notre Dame's has the same kick return philosophy that they have on offense, which is just don't screw it up. And that's you don't win championships by playing that way. You can play smart. You can have it to where, we don't want to turn the ball over, but like Lawrence Keys has, had the bad muff against Florida State.
Right.
And it's like, he was gone.
Never saw it again.
Right. Chris Tyree has that one bad return, which was his fumble, but also the coverage unit was bad. And it was then it's like, well, we're not going to do that again.
Yeah.
Why? You're playing a team that's better than you. They're better than you. You have one of the most explosive players in the country back there returning kicks. If they're gonna pin you inside the 15 anyway, then how about they pin you when you're trying to do something interesting? You set up a different return. You have a philosophy. It's like with anything. You can just set up basic returns that we hope to get it past the 25, or you can say, hey, look, we're gonna do a little something different to maybe create some confusion. If it doesn't work, they're gonna pin us at the 20. But if it does work, this sucker could go. There's none of that aggressiveness when it comes to the return game, and we don't see them taking advantage of the athleticism in the punt return game either, to do things to try to allow their returners to be more effective. It's just kind of like, just get it off and let them get it off, and we'll get it. And if they make a bad kick, then sure, we can return it and get some yards. But to me, there's so many things that teams that win do to steal yards. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that Notre Dame should have been as good as punt returning this year as Alabama was. Well, why do I say they shouldn't have been as good? Because Notre Dame doesn't have Devontae Smith. I mean, so I don't expect Lawrence Keys to average 21.6 punt return yards, but look what they did with CJ Sanders back in the day. I'm looking the numbers up now, Vince, and when they had this before Brian Polian, but when Notre Dame had a willingness to kind of get after it in the return game, they got some returns. I mean, 2016, CJ Sanders had 2 kick returns for touchdowns. And if you remember, he had a third kick return that was called back. Remember that kick return for a touchdown against Michigan State?
Yes.
They got called back because of a shaky holding penalty. He had another kick return the year before. That's in 2 years. He had 3 kick returns for touchdowns, and he also had a punt return for a touchdown, and they blocked a punt for a touchdown against USC in 2015. So in a 2-year span, Notre Dame generated 5 special teams touchdowns, right? And to me, stealing yards is so important, and we kind of started to get into this, and you can do that on offense by running RPOs, the screen game. There's things where, hey, if you want to play this, we're going to steal 6-7 yards on first down, right? It doesn't have to always be because, Notre Dame shouldn't run RPOs because they don't have explosive playmakers. Fine. Then they're not going to turn an RPO into an 80-yard touchdown. I don't care. Then give me the 7-yard gain on 1st and 10 because you pulled them through a quick out or a hitch, as opposed to the -1 yard gain or the +2 yard gain you'd have by handing the ball off to a 9-man box. It doesn't have to be Devontae Smith or you don't run RPOs at all. There is a middle ground that you still should have and execute that says you want to load the box and play off with your corners or play up with your corners. There's things we can do with the personnel we do have, even if I accept the premise Notre Dame doesn't have more talent at receiver. There are things you can do to steal 6, 7, 8 yards here and there that kind of force teams to spread out. Same thing with the return game. There are things you can do with your punt block operation that can maybe allow you to steal 7 or 8 yards on a return. It doesn't have to be you've got Ricky Waters and Rocket Ismail back there, or you don't do it at all, right? It's same concept. There's a middle ground here. And if you don't think you have dynamic returners, then there's some other things you can do from a punt block situation that you can force teams to, hey, look, we got to spend a little bit more time protecting than we normally do because they've got all these athletic linebackers, safeties, and receivers just flying at us trying to block the kick. So if we just do a free release, because what's happened in recent years, Vince, we'll do little X's and O's here. This putting the 3 linemen back or the 3 big guys back has changed everything. It used to be on punt return where you'd have sort of, your 5 linemen, you'd have the 2 wings, you have the 2 outside guys, right? So that's 9. Then you'd have the personal protector and then the punter.
Yep.
And so when you did that, everybody in that first level had to first block. I remember my freshman year, I was part of the coverage teams and the kick return teams, and it was you had to hold that sucker for 3 seconds before you could release.
You got to hear the thump.
Right. The only 2 guys that took off right away were the outside gunners, right? Well, now because of that, the 3 big boys back there and the way the teams have changed their punting operation, you can now send more guys just go at the snap, just go. And so that's partly why punt returns in general are a little harder to do. Well, the best teams, in my opinion, are the ones that are now saying, well, let's find the weaknesses in that and let's do some things to attack that force them to kind of hold more at the front. If you can force teams that are used to just shooting guys to say, hey, we got to spend 2 extra seconds making sure we're blocking all these guys.
Right.
Then that is how you then set up punt return opportunities. And so that's an area where Notre Dame does have the personnel to be more effective. So even if you don't have a great punt returner, you have a lot of athleticism at linebacker. You have a lot of athleticism and length at corner. You have a lot of athleticism at receiver. And the guys at receiver are guys that play defense. Put Jordan Johnson on a punt block. If he doesn't know the route tree, put him on the edge of a punt block and say, go flip and block the punt. You know what I mean? Or Xavier Watts, right? Like, use them in some way because you have talented players. So if you don't have that athleticism in the return game, you do have athleticism enough to then say, let's be aggressive attacking, which can then allow Matt Celerio to field a punt and gain 9, 10 yards occasionally.
That would still be way more than they're doing now.
Right. And that's stealing yards. And so
that's a first down,
especially in the big game. So that's why I say like the return game, I'm tired of this whole thing. Well, we don't have this, so we just accept mediocrity. Well, I'm tired of that. So no, I don't expect Notre Dame to have the second coming of Rocket Ismail at running back next year or in the return game next year. But so what? It can still and should still be better than it is.
Right.
And so you have too much athleticism at tight end. You have too much athleticism at linebacker. You have too much athleticism at corner and safety to not have better return units. Because it's not just about the return. And matter of fact, the returner a lot of times doesn't matter who you have a returner. If the other 10 dudes aren't doing a good job, I don't care who your returner is.
Right.
You have to be able to set up those returns. But part of that too is, are you scheming it up right?
Right.
And Notre Dame doesn't do that. And so you want to get to the point where after the first 2 or 3 games, you've done such a good job returning kicks that everybody's just saying, we're kicking it out of bounds. We're guaranteed to start at the 25 every time. And then that can create some opportunities where maybe they kick it out of bounds because they're so afraid of kicking it to you that they're just not going to give you that chance. Fine. That's a win. So that's kind of where I'm at, Vince, is this Brian Polian's got to do a much better job at that.
Especially as it's his only job.
100%. That's exactly right. Because you don't, it's like you can stay and
you can scheme that stuff all day long, baby.
Dude, you got one job.
And we've been to practice, okay? Right. You can scheme that stuff for 75% of practice.
Right.
Because you're not doing anything at that point. The kicking guys are off doing their own thing. He's not over there coaching guys how to kick the ball.
Right.
So he comes in when it's the special teams part of practice, which is a very minute, small part of practice, the part of practice that we usually get to see, frankly. And so there's plenty of opportunity for him to go in there and figure out and scheme his way into a much better return unit. No question.
Right.
And so hopefully we get to see that moving forward.
And I think when you have a special teams coordinator who doesn't coach a position, the expectation should be even higher.
Absolutely.
For what he does.
Yes.
And so that's kind of where I'm at is like, dude, if you can't really be good at the whole operation of special teams when that's all you do, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Right. So to me, that's why I say it's a big year for him because there's no talent excuses. There's no excuses. Like, go get it done. You play a lot of mediocre teams, right? Go get it done. Coach them up. Be more creative. Be more aggressive. And it's not just on Brian Polian. Part of that's got to be on Brian Kelly to say, hey, look, just as an overall philosophy, what do we have to lose, right? We keep getting our brains beat in by Clemson and Alabama and Ohio State, right? What do we got to lose?
Yeah. What if you rip one off?
You took a couple shots in the return game in offense and it didn't work. So they beat you 41-10 instead of 31-10, 14. You know what I mean? Like, who gives a crap? Take your shot, take your swing. I'd rather you get your brains beat in, but you went down swinging.
Yep.
Than to say, well, we played ball control, so we only lost by 17 instead of
that's what
37. I don't give a crap about losing by. You lost.
Yeah.
You're Notre Dame. Take your shot. And if you're not good enough, at the end of the day, hey, the other team was better than you. But take your shot. And that's the thing is, like, Brian Kelly coaches to beat Pitt. He coaches to beat Navy. He coaches to beat Northwestern and Duke and those teams. He's not building the program to beat Alabama, Clemson. Because if he did, he'd be doing things completely differently. You can out-talent all those teams, right?
Yep.
Build to be able to say, hey, how do we take our shot against this team? And that's what I want to see him do. And special teams, to me, can be a big part of that because that's where you can steal yards. I mean, we've talked about that. Think of some of the game-changing special teams plays we've seen at Notre Dame in the past. I think of the USC game, how big that blocked punt by Equanimous St. Brown. I believe Amir Carlisle recovered it for a touchdown.
Yep, former USC.
I think of 2015 when Stanford took that opening drive right down the field, scored a touchdown. And what does C.J. Sanders do? Takes it right back down the field. Going all the way back to the Rocket, breaking that kick return against Miami, how that just changed the complexity of that game. Because for all the talk about, well, we just can't beat Alabama. Well, you know what? Lou Holtz did beat that Alabama program. It was called the U. It was called Miami.
Yeah, exactly.
And Notre Dame beat Miami twice when Miami was doing then what Alabama's doing now.
Yep.
Right? And so, Notre Dame can and should do that. We shouldn't just, we lose to those teams. Okay, well, stop. Do something different to try to give yourself a better shot to win those games. Because what you're doing now clearly isn't working. So maybe you can hope that their starting quarterback and one of their better receivers is out for the year and their starting quarterback has COVID and they're missing 3 to 4 best defenders every time you play them. Maybe you can hope for that. But outside of that, you're not even competitive. But you should be more competitive. So take your shot, right? What do you have to lose? You're already losing to those teams anyway. Now you take your shot, and if you're still losing to them, nothing's changed. But at least now you can feel like, hey, we're doing everything we can. And then if you're not good enough and you're just not good enough, and I tip my hat to you. But part of my frustration with Notre Dame, and I think we're going to do a podcast on this soon, Vince, because somebody brought this up to me, is what should the expectations be at Notre Dame? Should we just be happy that they're 33-5? And so what if they're not Bama or Clemson? I'm not. And we'll talk about that in greater detail. But to me, special teams is a big part of that. It'll be more aggressive, steal those yards. That's where you can maybe get an opportunity to maybe change the game a little bit. So big year for Brian Polian, but at the end of the day, I don't put that all on Brian Polian because he's doing what his boss wants him to do. And that's just field the punt. Don't fumble it, just field it and call it a day.